Hi, I'm Louise Ennis at Community First Yorkshire. We provide practical support such as networks, resources and training to voluntary and community organisations of all shapes and sizes, as well as rural advocacy. I've been leading the Yorkshire Together partnership project to bring together private, public and voluntary sector members across Yorkshire to share skills and resources for causes and for communities. I've also been leading a hub that offers leadership development opportunities to voluntary organisations in North Yorkshire.
I'm Catherine Oakley and I work at the Rowntree Society. There are a few Rowntree organisations, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the JRF, which campaigns around poverty in the UK, the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, which is a philanthropic grant-making trust, and the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust. The Reform Trust funds campaigns for democratic and political reform. The Rowntree Society is distinctive from all of these, though we are based in York as well, and we sometimes work with the trusts. We're a small heritage charity and we facilitate educational projects and activities relating to the histories and the legacies of the Rowntree family.
We started a North Yorkshire Leadership Club in partnership with the Open University's Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership as a way to offer free, accessible leadership programmes to everyone in our sector, not just existing leaders. The club complements the Centre's online courses on developing leadership practice in the voluntary sector and collaborative leadership, with face-to-face sharing sessions, which we moved online during the pandemic restrictions.
I think we're all very aware how important leadership is in the voluntary sector, but the opportunity for networks and training can be limited alongside so many other time and financial pressures. So the great thing about our club is that it's peer-led. We take it in turns to facilitate sessions. We run it at a time and a pace that suits the participants. It's quite relaxed, it's informal and offers a safe space for us to share our experiences and our learning. We've also been able to use it to learn a little bit more about starting a career in the sector or starting out in the sector. And for some of us moving into more formal leadership positions.
Yeah, you referred to a formal leadership position there, Kat. If someone asked you what leadership was before you started this course, what would have sprung to mind?
Yeah. Well, I would have struggled not to imagine a single person, someone with certain qualities, perhaps, a charismatic and inspirational figure, probably. I can think of examples springing to mind now in the public eye and from my own experiences in the workplace. You probably can too. I would also have thought about somebody senior first and foremost, either a CEO or a senior manager, basically a key decision maker with a lot of power. What about you?
Yeah, when I started the course and the club, I was expecting to learn about personal leadership styles, how to sell your vision, bringing people with you as a strong leader. So all focused around the person.
One of the first things we covered was the fact that you don't need to be in a senior or a managerial role to be a leader, and that leadership isn't a set of innate practices or qualities, but something that you can learn and nurture.
I think the course has been a real eye-opener actually for us, because it focuses instead on leadership as something that's shared, so it can apply to everyone and anyone. It's not just for formal leaders or CEOs.
I think once I'd made that shift in my mind from leadership being the remit of one individual to it being a practice that anyone can undertake, it changed my perception of the word and of the idea, I think. I think I'll probably find it quite hard to unlearn that or unsee it when I hear the word leader or see conversations in the sector and beyond about leadership. The alternative to the dominant model of leadership, which we've talked about in our learning group and covered in the online content, is really to decenter the idea of leadership and see it as something that's more diffused.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about seeking other voices and perspectives beyond our own ideas and our experiences, identifying the limitations of our own experiences and ideas, and thinking more about participatory and democratic practice in leadership. That feels absolutely fundamental now in the context of the renewed urgency of campaigns for racial justice globally.
Totally, yeah.
And I feel as though participatory leadership, what can be difficult but also so powerful about it is that it's about ceding power. So using the platforms and the privileges that you have particularly if you've reached positions of formal leadership,
yeah,
so that you can open up new channels for the empowerment of marginalised and oppressed individuals, and not just through occasional consultations or in peripheral advisory groups, but in everyday practice and at every level of an organisation, wherever you can.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Learning Club, we've explored, haven't we, those concepts of collaborative and participative leadership and what they mean in practice, because challenges can't always be solved in the short term in the real world. So it'd be naive for leaders to aim for a unanimous decision from teams. That's not really what taking a democratic approach to leadership means. It's about giving everyone a chance to reflect and contribute to decision making, giving everyone a voice. And we've really seen that, I think, with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in our workplaces and communities. So that shared leadership and empowered decision making really enables a more rapid response on the front line, for people wanting to communicate and update, deliver services to people in need. It's not about parachuting in a hero to save the day. It's about all of us practicing a leadership approach. So tackling those difficult problems by, agreeing a course of action together and sticking by it. And I think I've really learnt from the course that with those complicated challenges, like the current crisis, it's about looking for the path that will cause maximum benefit and minimum fallout for everyone concerned. So in the case of COVID, it's about key workers, those who are vulnerable and isolated, and wider communities.
I remember wondering at first how shared leadership was compatible with decision making if you are a person in a formal leadership position, a manager, or in a position of seniority, and feeling perhaps that there was a bit of tension there, that they were at odds initially. But I remember us exploring that and agreeing about the need to be directive at times, that that's sometimes necessary, and thinking about how it might be possible within a shared leadership model so that the two aren't fundamentally opposed. We talked about how we're finding balance even when the temptation during a crisis can be to move into that totally directive mode because you're under pressure to just get things done.
Yeah, I think it's really all about that balance, isn't it? A really strong theme in the course, I think, and one I'm building into my own leadership approach, is the power of critical reflection. So in practice, that means building in time, obviously, to ask questions, consult and discuss and explore options inside the organisation or even inside the sector. But we're so solutions orientated in the way we approach things that we often try and avoid what I think it was Grint in the course called wicked problems that are ongoing and for which there's not really a perfect answer. So I think we've learned that by questioning our own assumptions and going beyond the limits of our own experience, we can make better decisions and ones that everyone's accountable for. Once we've taken that time to reflect, explaining why we're taking a decision is so important, and the likely immediate and longer term fallout, so people are with you and understand that, and then sticking with it when the inevitable fallout kicks in, really demonstrates clear leadership and direction. Don't know what you think.
I agree absolutely about being open and transparent about in that decision making process. One of the first things that I've tried to start implementing in my learning and in my practice at the moment emerges from a conversation we had in the Learning Club about vulnerability as a positive trait in leadership. So we looked at the traditional view of leadership as one which might identify the leader as a person with all of the answers, or at least some of the answers, rather than the person asking questions. And it is difficult to resist those expectations. Those expectations are there if you are in that kind of position, and it takes I guess a degree of sort of confidence and strength to identify your own limitations instead, particularly if you're doing so publicly, or in partnerships, or with trustees or collaborators.
Yeah.
But I do think that doing this can open up new possibilities for shared leadership. I'm really aware that in my current role there's so much I don't know. My title is Executive Director, so it sounds as though I should know what I'm doing. But I've been trying to get more comfortable with saying to our volunteers and trustees, collaborative partners, that I don't have the answers, saying I don't have the knowledge or the experience to take certain projects forward on my own or at all. And I think from there we can then start working together on something that no single one of us could achieve alone.
Totally, yeah.
The second thing I'm thinking about a lot is how I can support colleagues and collaborators to share their ideas when they're not fully formed, or if they're at an early stage. We had that really interesting group discussion about feeling pressure in a time-pressured environment at work to put forward ideas that are already quite complete or are fully formed, I guess, that sort of elevator pitch model of moving forward. And I remember we talked instead about the benefits of exploring those problems together and thinking about or envisaging possible solutions together, thinking about what that might look like in practical terms. And there were some really helpful suggestions from the course material that week around this. One was to refrain from interrupting people if they're trying to work through something out loud and they seem like they're struggling for words. I remember it encouraged us, the content that week encouraged us not to feel self-conscious when that happens to you as well. And it does happen to me quite often. Yep. It was those moments when that we think of as maybe moments of where we're kind of exhausted, or when our performance is a little bit off, which are in fact moments when we can be pushing our understanding and ideas forward, and our colleagues are doing the same.
Yeah, there's a great quote from the course, something like, "Unknowns in leadership practice are most powerfully explored collectively." And I think that's really true, isn't it? We shouldn't be scared of the unknown, of discussing that early on in projects, rather than trying to race to the end of, come up with a solution before we've thought properly. Should we talk a bit about collaboration and collaborative leadership in the sector?
Yes.
I'm sure most people in our sector agree, in fact all of us, that collaboration is the way forward for sustaining the voluntary sector, given ever increasing demand and reduced resources. But it's not always easy to know how to lead collaboratively, and that's something that's come up a lot in my conversations with other leaders. Particular issue for us, of course, is the way our services are commissioned by the public sector and funders. And that process makes organisations who could collaborate and would collaborate into competitors are obviously then less likely to share, join forces, and they're less able to offer complementary solutions and services. It's all about, offering the same service. And I think collaboration brings so many benefits for our sector. It gives us that greater voice together and more influence, and obviously a greater share of funds and resources together. But also makes us more joined up so that we can offer more holistic services for the communities that we serve. And we need to know how to collaborate, and that's where I think leadership development can really help.
I remember thinking about the challenges of collaborating in my learning journal for the course that week when we started out, and that was a pretty long journal entry. I think the first challenge was time. Obviously, we all agreed that identifying and building and maintaining collaborations is a huge commitment, and it requires a lot of energy alongside other operations. I know that certainly that's been an issue for me. I'm the only employee at our organisation, so our resources are limited. But there were some great pieces of practical advice from the online course about this. The first was to think about where the greatest early promise lies when you're looking for collaborations, and to go with that. The second was to focus your attention on the people with the power to enable or block the growth of your organisation. and both are about being selective but also strategic. I think there's definitely an issue around expectations in collaborating too. That's something I've encountered again and again in collaborations across different sectors and within the same sector. How can you ensure that expectations on all sides are understood at the outset of a project before you embark? In my experience, most collaborations can emerge quite informally, and that can make for some tough conversations when obstacles arise or circumstances change for one partner some way along the line. We had a really interesting conversation in the online club about the learning you can draw from failed collaborations as well, which partnerships haven't gone well in the past and why. We can be quite eager to move on if something doesn't work, but it's been quite useful to have space to reflect critically, as you said, and think about what you would have done differently.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something we don't do enough of, really. In my own experience, the key to successful collaborations is agreeing expectations up front. I think that's really important, and not being able to work through any elephants in the room. That's how things get sorted and progress gets made. You know, if you're always striving for harmony and collaboration, you're not going to get action, and you're not going to enable everyone to have a voice. So those thorny issues are the ones that really count and need to be openly discussed. That's why they're thorny issues. And looking at a range of viewpoints is the way to solve them. And the course authors, Carol Jacqueline Jarvis and Owen Smolovitz Jones, put this really well, I think, in the course when they said disruption can help people learn to explore together, so they're willing to expose themselves to challenge a new insight together. And that's what partnerships and collaboration are all about.
Yeah, I mean, for a small heritage organisation like ours, working collaboratively ensures that we can reach more people and extend the impact of our work. It helps us build a cross-sector community of individuals and organisations who can approach projects and problems in distinctive ways that we wouldn't otherwise have considered.
Yeah, that's so true. Our discussions have shown, I think, as well, that it's much more effective to seek a range of collaborators, isn't it? Don't just go to those people who think like you. So, I don't know, asking volunteers, for example, or funders as well as beneficiaries. I think there's a clear opportunity as well for leaders to collaborate outside the sector by bridging cultures and challenging perceptions. You know, perceptions like the private sector's all about profit, or the voluntary sector's a bunch of well-meaning amateurs doing good works. Being open to wider perspectives and building trust and understanding really creates an opportunity for us to put the beneficiaries first and come up with solutions for our communities together. And I think those boundaries between work and volunteering are becoming increasingly blurred. You know, the CEO of a company may also be a trustee, and lots of employees do employee volunteering programs in the workplace or deliver voluntary services in their own time. I mean, just look at the COVID-19 response networks that are springing up across the UK. They're all manned by volunteers sharing their professional skills. So the bottom line is we all care about where we live and work, whatever sector we work in. And by taking a more collaborative approach, leaders can give all of us a voice and a way to contribute.
Do you remember back in the first week of the first course when we covered the difference between a managerial approach and a leadership approach in organisations?
That's always a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember, so we talked about how the managerial approach works through processes and systems and policies, established procedures really that are in place to try and ensure that people and an organisation as a whole works effectively. And we talked about that in contrast to a leadership approach or leadership practice that aims to open things up and maybe unsettle existing practices and assumptions.
Yeah.
And I think the COVID-19 pandemic is forcing lots of organisations in the sector into managerial mode out of necessity, because things are so pressured right now as the sector's responding as best it can to the crisis. But in the medium to long term, I think it's probably leadership practice that's shared and collaborative and democratic that will be really important in navigating the complex consequences of the pandemic. And it's important that we try and balance the two approaches and create time and space, certainly for the kind of more open approach. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, because we've seen the VCS, the voluntary sector, step up to respond to that crisis by delivering services to isolated and vulnerable people. But they've also become a channel for the public and private sector to provide financial and volunteer support where it's needed most. So it's clear, I think, that those smaller, leaner, more open, flatter charities and voluntary organisations with less layers of hierarchy and management, more frontline contact and devolved decision making are just better placed to respond more quickly and are taking a lead. So, what we were saying earlier, the hero leader holding all the reins would just get bogged down in multiple decisions and delegating tasks that would cause blockages and take longer for organisations to respond and act. But in a crisis situation, an empowered team or network of leaders able to consult, reflect and problem solve and then cover each other as needed is just far more effective. And I think we've seen that out in the voluntary sector. I mean, think someone in our learning club came up with the idea of geese flying in formation.
Yeah.
I think the ones at the rear take over the leaders, others get tired. And that sharing leadership approach really is working for COVID. I think another important lesson from the lockdown is how perceptions about the charity sector may change afterwards, because even within our own organisations we may have different perceptions, say, of the value of volunteers and paid employees. And the COVID response has been volunteer-led, and that really demonstrates the importance of both types of role to how we operate in our sector.
Yeah, I remember talking about that contrast, or the relationship between how paid staff and volunteers work together. We talked about approaching volunteering as a type of collaboration in the Learning Club, didn't we? And initially I'd thought about collaboration as something a bit more formal, as one organisation exploring possibilities for partnership with another. But thinking about volunteering through the lens of collaboration was really helpful too. It can be easy to lose sight of the needs of your volunteers when you're in crisis mode. I think a few people in the club that week pointed this out and suggested that we still need to be reaffirming those needs on all sides explicitly as much as we can.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the course and our learning club meetings have really highlighted the need as well for us to question our unconscious bias, so that staff, volunteers and the people our organisations support are all equally valued and included. I think just looking back over the course, we all agree we've got so much out of it. So the course has been great, both courses, developing leadership practice in the voluntary sector and collaborative leadership. But the peer sharing has just been so rewarding as well through our learning club. And I think holding our sessions face to face at the beginning was far more informal and energising, but the online sessions have been convenient for people and enabled people to keep going through the pandemic. And I think there's probably room for a combination of both going forward. And we've also been sharing links and ideas in our WhatsApp group, haven't we, for the club, as well as in the OU discussion forum. So we've had a number of channels which have all worked, I think.
I'm quite new to the sector, and I've loved just meeting and hearing from other people who are working locally and regionally. So it's really worked well from the perspective of building that network as well. We all work for different kinds of voluntary organisations, but there's a sense of common values and shared interests, I think.
Absolutely.
It's been a relief to have an hour or so each week just to take a step back from things and check in with everyone and have these broader conversations as well. We had that moment, I think, just after lockdown where we decided we'd have to be a bit more relaxed about how we approach the sessions. So there's a sliding scale for levels of engagement in the group now. I know some people have been completing online modules quite rigorously. Some of us are trying to keep up as best we can. Others are just sort of focusing on the learning club meetings online as a place to have maybe a focused conversation or two to pick up people's perspectives outside of their own, or just to kind of stay in touch generally as well.
Yeah, and I think that leading meetings from our homes during the COVID-19 lockdown with interruptions, from your kids and your pets, has brought a more human side to the workplace, which is more real, it's more open, and it builds on that common experience as people, not just colleagues.
Yeah, I love the interruptions. They're just these really lovely informal moments of shared vulnerability
and shared experience, which is
yeah
so important
yeah
about our club, isn't it, as well? I
yeah
really do think that our colleagues right across the voluntary sector would benefit from getting together like we have. So creating that trusted, safe space to explore collaborative leadership together and to start to build kind of network of people you can talk to who have the same attitudes and the same approach and can share.
yeah there's just so much common experience to share, and I've recommended the course and the idea of the learning club to a few friends and tried to emphasize that it's not just for senior leaders, it's for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, people could take the course out into the community as well. It doesn't just have to be for the workplace, you know, for volunteer organisations as well. It's got so much to offer.